If your kids have ever pushed every single one of your buttons, gotten on every single one of your nerves, and you were just at your wit's end, the thought of being a quote mindful mom is almost insane. You're like, first of all, I don't have time for this. Second of all, I'm not a very calm person. I don't just sit around, and I think we kind of have these Zen Buddhist thoughts of like, sitting there in silence and meditating for hours and hours at a time. If those are thoughts that you've ever had and you kind of have this natural resistance to like, what the heck is a mindful mom? And that surely can't be me, then today's episode is for you. Welcome to Becoming a Mindful Mom. I'm your host, Courtney Tong, and I am a wife and a mom who believes that our spiritual life doesn't have to be stale and stoic, but that it can be beautiful and flowing into every part of our life, our marriage, and our motherhood. If you are tired of feeling overwhelmed, isolated, and simply surviving in motherhood, you are not alone. I want to equip you with the tools to have healthy boundaries, authentic connections with others, and a flourishing spiritual life. If you are ready to become the best version of you as a beloved daughter of the King, as a spouse, as a mom, as a friend, you are in the right place. I want you to go to the microwave, grab the tea or coffee that you already forgot about, throw some ice in it like we did it on purpose, and let's get started. Today, we are diving into the 3 ways to fight the lie, I have no time to become a mindful mom. Like I said in the intro, it can just be so hard when we have all of these preconceptions of what mindfulness is. Then we think, surely there is no way that I'm going to be a mindful mom. Or maybe you're like me and you have a little bit of a spicy temperament. And so being a mindful person doesn't always feel in alignment. I'm kind of figuring out what that looks like for me. But there has been tremendous value that has come as I've started to uncover this beauty of being mindful. So I want us to start out with number 1, redefining mindfulness. And what does being mindful mean? I think a lot of times we associate mindfulness with kind of just new age, secular thought processes. And that's true. I mean, that has been used in that space a lot, but I don't think that we need to discount it just because it's being used there. If we actually look up what mindfulness is or think about it, ironically, it really just means to pay attention, to be mindful of something. So mindfulness can look a lot of different ways, but in the context of this show, in the context of this heart behind it, is to really start to pay attention to our life, exterior life, and also our interior life, what's going on in our heart and in our soul, what is the Lord doing in your life. And the reason why we want to pay attention is because we don't want to just go through this life floating through, simply surviving. We want to go through it well. We want to thrive, right? And so if you are a new mom or if you're a mom with little kids, it can be really hard because our focus is so shifted to providing for our kids and making sure they're okay and pouring out, that it's really hard for us to pay attention to what's going on with us, what's going on even around us. So that could be in our marriage or in our friendships, even how we're starting to interact with our kids as they get older. And so for us to pay attention, to be mindful of that is really, really important. So when we hear the term mindfulness, and especially on this show, I want you to think about it in that context. How are we being mindful of what's going on in our interior life and our exterior life? How can we surrender that to the Lord? How can we start to make progress and become the best version of ourselves in those spaces? And that doesn't mean that you become mindful and then you fix it all. That's not what this means, but it means paying attention versus just letting life happen to us and us not even realize where the time went or what happened or why have I not made any progress, because sometimes we're just in denial that maybe it's not the way things should be. And so it's hard to take a look sometimes, but I think it can be so rewarding because as we are all taking a look at ourselves, we're realizing, okay, I have stuff that I can work on. These are kind of the things that are coming to the top of the list for me. If we're doing that in community, then you're not the only one, right? There's other people that are also working on some things that might be similar to what you're working on. So as we're growing in that together, it doesn't isolate you so much. It doesn't set you apart. It actually brings us together. And I think there's a beauty in that. That's why community is so important, because isolation can be really dangerous. And that's so hard for new moms. There's already so many things going on with your body and your hormones and just having sleep deprivation and so much going on in your heart and your mind. It can be really hard to not be isolated or not feel isolated as a new mom. So I want us paying attention, interior, exterior, so that we can start to grow in those areas. The next part I want to talk about is time. So if we're saying, I have no time to become a mindful mom, well, okay, let's take a look. What is going on our schedule? Now, granted, some of you might have a little bit older kids packed with sports schedules. For those of us that have younger kids, more toddler age or newborn, it looks a little bit different in this season, but it's a different kind of busy, right? It might not be sports schedules, but it might be having to wake up for feedings or going to doctor's appointments or this or that. So if we're saying, I have no time, I want to ask you to honestly take a pause and look. If you have an iPhone, you can pull up your settings and go to screen time. And if your phone is saying that you're on your phone with screen time for more than 3-4 hours, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, let's pay attention to that, right? That's pretty important. A lot of times we just get so overwhelmed that we don't want to do anything else. We don't want to be productive. We just want to rest, quote unquote, rest. So we grab our phones. We do a check-in on social media, or we do a puzzle, or we do something because and granted, there are times, 100%, please just do your puzzle. If you need to go message a friend, please go do that. But if we're paying attention to where that time is going, we probably have more time slipping away than we would like to admit. So that's not to condemn or to judge anybody, but again, being mindful, I want us to pay attention to that. Again, if you have an iPhone, I'm sure Androids have a similar situation, but on my iPhone, if I go to settings, right there at the very top-ish, it says screen time. You click on that and it can show you, if you're like, well, I read on a Kindle on my phone, it actually shows you the breakdown. So there's like the total time, but then it can break it down by apps or categories. And so, if you're seeing, okay, well, Instagram or Facebook, like multiple hours a day, probably something we need to pay attention to. So that brings me to my third point. And that brings me to the third point of understanding the word becoming. So in this podcast title, it's Becoming a Mindful Mom. And being mindful, that's important. That's a good word for us to pay attention to, if you will. And being a mom is just a core part of our identity. But becoming is it's an intentional word that I wanted to be in the title because it's so full of grace. If you think that we're going to sit down, listen to this podcast, all of a sudden decide, okay, I'm going to be a more patient mom, or I'm going to be a thoughtful wife, or I'm going to be so intentional with my friends. And then all of a sudden you just, boom. Awesome. If you can do that, more power to you. But if you're like the rest of us, this is not an overnight thing. This is not a quick fix. This is the process of becoming. As we are becoming more like Christ, as we are trying to model our life after Him, loving on others, being understanding, being patient, confessing to one another, humility, so many things, right? This is not easy, it's not fast, but it's so worth it. And again, just the grace that is a part of that becoming. I want us as a community to come together, to pray for one another, to encourage one another, to hold each other accountable. So In the future, we're going to have some fun things going on in the Facebook group, so be sure to join if you haven't yet. But I really want this to be where we can foster a community where we can become together and really give that to the Lord and see what He wants to do with it. Coming together and holding space for one another as we're on this journey together. Because a lot of us feel like it's just me, or am I the only one that's struggling with this? And the answer is no, you're not. We've all had those times where we feel like we've just let everybody down, or we've been a better mom than we've been a better wife, or we've just struggled to have the time to go see friends because we feel like it's a burden if we bring our kids along. There's a whole list of things, and you're not alone in feeling that. I felt that. My friends have felt that. The women that I've talked to have felt that. And so I want us to be able to foster this community where we can be vulnerable and we can encourage and spur one another on and support each other, whatever that looks like. We're all going to need different kinds of support in different seasons, and that is totally fine. That's what we're here for. So today, these are the 3 ways that we can fight the lie. I have no time to become a mindful mom. 1, we just need to redefine mindfulness and what does mindful even mean. The reality check of where does our time really go, and check on your screen time. And number 3, understanding the grace of becoming. Thank you, sister, for joining me for today's episode. Whether you were preparing dinner, doing laundry, nursing the baby, or commuting to work, I am glad you brought me along for the journey. And I would love to connect with you over at Instagram or our Facebook group, both of which are linked in the show notes. Or you can shoot me an email. I would love to hear from you.
Don't forget which Bobby you feel.
All right, there you have it, folks. Straight from the mouth of babes. That's my son. If you are blessed or encouraged by this episode, it would mean so much to me if you would take a quick moment and leave a review. And if you have a mom friend that you think needs to hear this episode, be sure to share it with them as well. All right, girlfriend, may you continue to rest in the peace of God amidst the craziness of motherhood. Meet you back here next week.